Hey, everyone. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky, Patrick Beverley was introduced to the media in Los Angeles on Tuesday, and Russell Westbrook was in the building to greet him, and nobody bled. That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. Always free, never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers is where you go to see the podcast. You get to see all of this happen. Some fun things that we do in that show to make it a little bit different, and you tend to get it a little earlier than the straight audio version if you want to get it a couple hours ahead of everyone else. Make another Locked On podcast your second listen of every day, but only after making us your first. Some interesting stuff that came out of the Pat Beverley introductory press conference in LA on Tuesday, both things that Beverley himself said, Beverley said about Russell Westbrook, that Darvin Ham said about Russell Westbrook. But as you can tell, Andy, a lot of this is still about Russell Westbrook. And I really do think that the most striking thing, the most important thing, and the thing that everybody's talking about when you look at what happened on Tuesday is that Russell Westbrook was in the building to greet Patrick Beverley and kind of be a part of this introduction. That's kind of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I thought this was a really big deal. I mean, we've talked about this before, and it's obviously been well documented. Russell Westbrook and Patrick Beverley have had a serious feud, like a very acrimonious feud in the NBA. This is very different than Matt Barnes, doing the ball fake on the
Jeannie tried to make it in her interview. Right. I think it was with Sam, right? Amick last week with The Athletic. I tried to make that comparison.
Yeah, or when Kobe and Ron Artest got into it during the 2009 playoffs, when then Ron, now Meadow, was with the Houston Rockets. Kobe elbowed him in the throat. Like, that stuff that was tense in the moment, but that was stuff that was really about on the court. And there was no evidence that there was an actual problem between Kobe and Barnes or Kobe and Artest. I mean, Ron Artest the year before that had entered the showers inside the Boston arena after Kobe and those guys lost in 2008 and was actively recruiting himself
right?
Pitching himself to a naked Kobe and the rest of these guys in the showers to join the team. So there was no bad blood. This was just about basketball. The stuff going on between Russ and Pat Bev went well beyond basketball.
And it's not like it was like, oh, but guys, it was 5 years. Pat Beverley called Russ trash last season.
He didn't just call him trash, held his nose at his play, talked about
the stinky thing.
Right. Talked about how Russell Westbrook, with the whole Pat Bev been tricking you all, cost him money. It changed his perception around the league. Patrick Beverley, he's well established now, but he is somebody that really had to fight to get into the league, carve out a foothold. And I think in a lot of ways still sees himself, presents himself as that guy to maintain that edge that he thinks is necessary. So I think Westbrook being there was significant. It's worth noting too. I mean, for all of the issues that went with Russ last season, the press conference that turned into Westbrook's personal Festivus with the rest of the team, and the freeze out at Summer League between LeBron and Russ being, I'm sure, quite aware at the team's efforts to move him this summer. This was acknowledged by his now ex-agent Thad Fouché. Russ has been showing up to stuff. He showed up to Darvin Ham's introductory press conference and was by far the biggest name there. He was at Summer League sitting with the team, by all accounts, acting as a quasi-coach, really helping out the young guys. And he was by far the biggest name at Patrick Beverley's press conference. So whether he is just trying to do all the right things for optical purposes trying to do the right things for genuine attitudinal purposes, some combination, whatever. He has actually been doing the things that you would want from a $47 million player.
Right. And it's funny, like, the clip of, like there were sort of like two big interactions that got a lot of attention on social media. If you go back and you see the day and you watch the press conference, Beverley's press conference on Tuesday, which was pretty short anyway, was delayed in part because he was on the court working out. So he comes and he sits down and he's
still
sweating.
Yeah.
He looks like a guy who just did an NBA, preseason basketball workout. And Russ provided him, threw him a towel like, hey, Pat, wipe that sweat off. You're about to talk to the media. And, Pat said, thank you. And, first dime of the season and all that kind of stuff. That was a moment. Then as he's done and going to kind of do the rest of his stuff and whatever, they have exchange. And this is the clip that I think most Lakers fans have seen, certainly by now, of the awkward bro hug between the two of them. And look, we'll get into this, some of this, some of the things that Beverley said that acknowledged the challenge of the relationship, that like acknowledge, yes, we have had problems, we don't get along and all that. But, the being their part is important. And to your point, I don't know exactly what the combination is of genuine self-reflection that has led Russ to a place where he knows he's got to do things differently to extend his career, and spite. Like there's probably a little bit from both columns. It is better if he does things out of the former, out of a real understanding and a genuine desire to really truly change some of the things and meet expectations and maybe take a lesser role and all that kind of stuff. That's better. No question. I will say this, compared to a lot of players in the league though, spite might carry Russ farther than it would other guys. It's not ideal.
Well, in Russ's case, it could carry him in either direction.
Correct.
But it could be the equivalent of the highest octane fuel.
Right.
Like whatever's the most expensive,
I'm
91.
just saying, like you could get more. Typically, doing things out of spite won't work. It's just not a good. You run out of the energy to spite your way through unhappiness. Russ is one of the guys who I think could be the exception and carry that a little farther before. I agree with you. It would eventually go off the rails. It's not sustainable. It's just probably sustainable longer for him than it would be with other people.
No, it's the equivalent of using solar panels. Like it just keeps recharging every single day.
Yes.
It's very energy efficient in that sense.
Yes. And, it works when the lights go off. I mean, everybody rest assured, solar panels still work that way. So I don't think it can be, I think he's trying. And, to that point, and maybe we'll get to this next, Darvin spent a lot of time talking about Russ. I mean, I realize it was technically Patrick Beverley's day, but all of this still takes place in the context of Russell Westbrook. And one more thing about that before we pivot to Darvin. From Beverley's perspective, he is not stupid. He sees exactly what's been going on. He understands how hard it is in the NBA to trade somebody like Westbrook and get a return that the Lakers and all this stuff that we've been walking through all summer. And this whole time he's been lobbying to be on this team. It can't possibly be with the expectation that, yeah, I'll be here, but there's 0% chance that Russell Westbrook will be too. I refuse to believe that. He had to know that this was possible.
Well, yeah, except he also might have thought it was very possible that he would be traded for Russ. So there's always the possibility that he was lobbying because he thought his arrival with the Lakers would actually mean Russ's departure.
Okay. To be fair, to your point, it's also possible he didn't think he would play with Russell Westbrook.
I mean,
but I'm just saying,
let's not overstate how benevolent Patrick Beverley's been.
No.
In this situation.
All I'm saying is there is a part of him that had to be prepared for this possibility.
Sure, but he also
don't you think?
Yes,
okay.
I absolutely think he also might have thought he was killing two birds with one stone.
And I think everybody wishes he was, but he's not.
Right.
So Darvin talked about Russ, and he talked about the combination of Russ and Pat Bev. both of which are very interesting and have serious implications for how this team could roll into the season. We'll get to that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar, Built Bar Puffs. They are sweeping the nation. And as always, they got new flavors right now. Feast your eyes and your mouth on the cookie dough chunk puffs. They got a light, chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks. And as always, like all of the Built Bar bars, the Built Bar Puffs, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. It is all of the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making, without the hassle of cleaning it up, without the hassle of your kids all around you getting in the way as you are cooking the cookie dough or cleaning the cookie dough. Plus, healthy for you, way healthier than your average cookie dough. Cookie dough chunk puffs, only 160 calories and 15 grams of protein in them. And what's great about them is it's the collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently, provides a ton of health benefits. Order a box for you and the family. It is a perfect treat. Ditch the calories, ditch the fat, ditch the sugar. Grab yourself a Built Bar. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON15. Get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKEDON15. 15% off at Built.com.
So we'll get, again, more to things that Beverley said, because how he answered some questions I thought we both thought were great and indicative of what he's going to do in LA. But let's start with Darvin, who reiterated again regarding Westbrook, how excited he is to have him here, how excited he is to work with somebody's, the tenacity of Westbrook with the skill set and all these other things. And so he continues to use that language around Russ. But the other thing that I think is really interesting, and he talked about it in the context of, can he play with Pat Beverley, for example? Can those two guys coexist in the same backcourt from a basketball standpoint? And his answer was yes, if they play defense. And he's not talking to Beverley.
No.
He's talking to Russ. And that has been the other theme that's gone through this. Like, he has reinforced all the time. Love Russ, love what he brings, love his potential on defense, love what we think he can do there, and also reinforce the idea that he needs to play well on that end if he wants to have the kind of role that he expects. Is he delusional slightly about Westbrook's potential on that side? Maybe. But there's a really clear setup of expectations and a roadmap going forward that I think Ham is laying out brilliantly so far this summer.
I'm guessing that Ham is not so much potentially delusional about how much skill and effectiveness Westbrook can bring on the court defensively, as he might be how much effort and focus that he'll bring on that end. I have a feeling that if Russ really dedicates himself to being engaged defensively and to really make it a priority for himself, that it certainly wasn't last season with the Lakers, and frankly hasn't been for Russ for about, the last 6, 8, maybe 10 years of his career. Russ has not really been a consistently engaged defender since probably like the latter half of his time in OKC. But I feel
I was thinking maybe was he at UCLA? I don't.
Well, no. I actually, when Russ first started,
people expected him to be a good defender.
Well, I actually thought his first few years that Russ was going to be a really good defender, because he used to get so geared up in these matchups that he had against Kobe early in his career. And then I came to realize he just likes competing against Kobe. He doesn't do that against everybody else. He just really enjoys the challenge of trying to defend Kobe, because Kobe was one of his idols, having grown up in LA. So James Harden was the same way too. Harden, his first couple seasons in the league, I was like, damn, that guy gets after it defensively. Turns out, he just likes the challenge of defending Kobe. But I feel like, though, if Westbrook really is evidently dedicating himself to trying defensively, to being focused and having some type of accountability, that word again, on defense, I think Darvin will actually have a fair amount of leeway for him, because you would hope the other stuff that he does do well offensively could offset some of that. But also, too, if Westbrook is dedicating himself, I think there's actually going to be a trickle-down effect towards the other guys who don't have the same gravitas as him. Like, there's an an infectiousness with defense that can run positive and negative. And I think he's hoping for more positive, infectious defense, or at least effort from Russ.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see where the threshold is. Like, how effective is effective enough? Because I was sort of half kidding when I was like, is he delusional? But like, what is the threshold that, defensively, that will keep Westbrook on the floor? And I love the way that Darvin is talking him up while setting expectations and making it very clear that if this will be the reason likely that you aren't on the floor, late in games, whatever it might be. But it'll be fascinating, assuming this is the team that they open up with, to see what it is. And is average good enough? Because the average would be an improvement. And especially when you have a team that at least theoretically profiles as being able to put some better defensive lineups on the floor. If a guy like Troy Brown is enough offensively, and another year, with a stronger Austin Reeves, and Kendrick Nunn could provide a little improvement there. Beverley is obviously an upgrade, and you have Damian Jones in the middle is an upgrade, from what they had last year. And so, like, there are some possibilities in terms of improved defense that will help make average Russ on that side of the ball, or just not a liability, different. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what that is, because I like that they're still going through, like, the at the very least going through the motions of we're gonna try to make this work. We're going, people seem surprised that, like, Russ was going to be invited to LeBron's annual preseason camp. Why on earth wouldn't he be? He's on the freaking team, people. He's going to be there.
Well, first of all, he ought to be invited because he's on the Lakers because LeBron invited him.
Right.
I think it's really incumbent upon LeBron to keep including him in things like, let's set a tone for trying to bounce back from the worst season in franchise history, certainly the most disappointing season in franchise history. I mean, it'll be interesting too, like, seeing if Pat Bev and Russ play together, like, in terms of that defense, Patrick Beverley, how much he will be calling out mistakes or lapses from Russ or from everybody else.
And then how he reacts.
Right. But that's something that Patrick Beverley has said he will do. And something that he has said he has no problem doing it no matter who he's calling out. And that type of culture setting that he talked about doing with the Clippers. He talked about doing it last season with the Timberwolves. And it was valuable in Minnesota. And I think it was valuable, at least for a while, with the Clippers. It's also interesting, too, in terms of how they might fit offensively. Patrick Beverley talked about...
I'm glad I was about to bring this up. I'm glad you're going there. Yeah.
Talked about the fit with Russell Westbrook is, quote, perfect. And he said, I shoot a ton out of the right corner wing. He posts on the left wing out of timeouts. He likes to post on the right wing. I shoot 50% from the left corner three. It works to have another ball handler out there with me. Obviously, with LeBron, also, the more ball handlers you have, the better you are as a team. And look, like we talked about before, going through the motions or saying the right thing, there may be some of that going on just right now between Russ and Patrick Beverley as they kind of size each other up, figure each other out. But if nothing else, those numbers from Patrick Beverley took effort and researching. Like, that's more than just going through the motions and throwing out cliches. Like, that's digging through advanced stats on NBA.com or cleaning the glass. So kudos to Pat Beverley.
But again, that gets to where, I mean, maybe he looked it up afterwards, but like,
whatever.
He claimed that he was like, asked a few years ago about who guys he'd love to play with, and Westbrook was on that list. And
either way, he went the extra mile to sell this bleep. So good on Patrick Beverley.
I agree. And like, I mean, in theory, they actually can't, because like, Beverley is not a point guard in the sense of like he initiates your offense. Like that's not really been his function.
They're complete opposite players.
Right. And so, from a size standpoint, it can theoretically work and other. It really is a question of whether or not Russ plays enough defense. So Beverley did acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is we've always hated each other, me and Russ. And he also, though, made pretty clear some things that he thinks he brings to the team. We'll also try to get a quick update on Kendrick Nunn, which Darvin provided on Tuesday. But we'll turn to Pat Bev and what he brings and what Darvin thinks he brings next. So, to his credit, Beverley wasn't like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. When the issues that those two have had came up, and he said, look, it's like any marriage, it's like whatever, we're going to have tough conversations. So he acknowledges that they've got some things to work through. I thought that was good just because it shows that nobody is living in a fantasy land. Nobody is presuming that just because now we're on the same team, it's going to be perfect when these guys get at it in practice. Like some of that's not going to bubble up or whatever. But we are grown-ups. We are professionals. We all want to win. And this is something that we can talk through like grown-ups, like professionals, and get that done.
Yeah, I mean, he could be specifically referencing the relationship and the acrimony between them over like the last decade. He could also be talking about stuff in the future too, like just the idea that over the course of any season, there's going to be conflict. I mean, that's just normal, even for teams that get along. There's still fights at practice, even for teams that have incredible chemistry. That stuff just happens. It's normal. But what can sometimes turn into problems is when nobody will just acknowledge them and you just let the stuff fester. And if nothing else, Patrick Beverley seems like he's somebody that does not let a lot of, proverbial sleeping dogs lie. Like he is at times, I think, maybe more confrontational about things or, sort of looking for confrontation maybe than is helpful. I mean, there a few seasons ago when the Clippers had their very well documented chemistry issues the first year that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George were there, it was well reported that Patrick Beverley was in the middle of that on the side of the holdovers, like him and Lou Williams and some of the guys that were part of that little engine that could vibe for the Clippers, that they were an 8 seed and they were greater than the sum of their parts. And they seemed to resent the idea of Kawhi and Paul George being treated differently as stars, which, look, that's part of the deal, But that being said, though, I think this is a very different situation. He's arriving to join the already established stars, and it seems like he wants to be part of just helping set a different culture, which frankly needs to be reset no matter who's doing it.
It was interesting. Probably the other clip that got the most attention was when Mike Bresnahan on Spectrum Sportsnet was talking to him, and sort of that's the station, for people who don't know, that carries Laker games. They're the TV home of the Lakers. And Brez was out there and did the one-on-one with Pat Bev and was like, excited to play with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. And he's like, they're excited to play with me. I made the playoffs last year. And there were a few people that were like, oh my God, he's throwing shade. I loved that answer because it's like, it's not saying I'm better than LeBron, I'm better than AD, or like, this is my team. Like, I am the captain now. But he is telling them, like, I have value.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what I bring here is something that this team needs. This is not a team that had a lot of grit last year. This is not a team that, I think, had the requisite amount of fight that it needed or toughness or any of that.
You think?
I do not. And so he's like, and they've had 1.5 good seasons in the last 9. That's not a lot.
No, it's not.
And Patrick Beverley's teams have been more successful over that stretch than the Lakers have. And that is the attitude that will make him valuable. I mean, he does give off a bit of a kind of a tweaky, crazy vibe sometimes. And I think sometimes it's, like you said, more confrontational than it needs to be. It's a little over the top. This is how he stays in the league. This is part of his process, All these guys do weird stuff. I mean, Kevin Durant does things like this. He's Kevin Durant. Pat Beverley has had to work a lot harder to stay in the league than Kevin Durant. But I like that he answered the question that way.
Yeah. I mean, we used to talk about this all the time. The way Derek Fisher, who had a great relationship with Kobe, was a longtime teammate of his, but was a role player, very celebrated role player, but a role player nonetheless.
Yes.
And he used to talk about all the time that playing with Kobe meant protecting your space. Because if you don't do that, Kobe will just steamroll you. And sometimes that required, looking off Kobe when he wanted the ball, which was always, and occasionally doing something that Kobe may not approve of. You have to have a reason for doing it. It has to be justified, all that stuff. But ultimately, it's about protecting your space and presenting your worth as somebody who's clearly not as good as Kobe, or clearly in this case, not as good as LeBron or AD, but you project your own value. And I think that's what Patrick Beverley was doing there. I saw somebody on Twitter mention that it felt a little bit like, shades of Dennis Schroeder the year he was there. And I understand what that person meant, but the difference is Schroeder's a scorer, and it's always different when you're talking about guys who look to score or are more of just the man out there, guys who are used to quote unquote cooking when they're on the court. Patrick Beverley knows what his value is. He has an ego about his value. He may at times allow that ego to get in the way. Like there will be times where he will pick up from 94 feet too aggressively, pick up a couple stupid fouls. He'll look to do the antagonizing thing a little too much, pick up a technical that puts the team in a bad position. Neither one of us is trying to present Patrick Beverley as perfect as a player, but his ego in terms of what he's accomplished as a player, A, is earned, but B, it's like you mentioned, it's necessary.
Right.
It's necessary for these guys to maintain confidence alongside a LeBron or an AD or a Russ.
He plays in such a specific way, and he's performed such a specific function over the course of his year. It's a little like when Juan Toscano Anderson, at his introductory press conference, talked about how, like, his initial resistance to being called like a character guy, a glue guy, one of those guys, because it feels like you're being diminished as a basketball player. But then he kind of
Ronnie Turioff
into it and
talk about
embraced
that all
it
the time to us.
Yeah. As like something that like he understood what that means and why it's valuable. And the other big difference I think between Schroeder and Beverley is Schroeder is still chasing something in terms of what he thinks he is in the league, what he thinks he ought to be, and how he ought to be seen. Pat Bev's not. Everybody knows what Beverley is, and he has carved out that niche, and he can play it as long as he's effective. Schroeder is again, it's not the same thing. So I don't worry about it in that sense. Lakers still got to get better. There was an update on Kendrick Nunn. We'll save that for the next show because we can actually give it, the time it deserves. Got a lot of great responses to Tuesday's show when we kind of broke down the Lakers options and what this stuff with Utah might look like. Some great comments from that, which we'll bring back presumably for the next show, go through some of that. So still a lot to talk about. And thank you to the Lakers for having a press conference today to content, Andy. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to see the podcast and get it generally a little bit earlier than the audio product. We appreciate all the support there. We're getting near 8,000 subscribers. Help us get past that. We really appreciate it. Thanks to all the support from the community there, and we will see everybody next time.